I love making things more convenient for myself, even if it means being a bit extra, which is why I created what I am calling a crochet book purse sleeve, which is basically just a regular crochet book sleeve that I've attached handles to, but it makes carrying my books around that much easier and it looks really cute. Plus, you guys absolutely loved when I posted my original video on TikTok back in May, so I'm really excited to be able to share this tutorial with you. If you don't know me already, my name is Kennedy. I create crochet and craft content, and today I'm going to show you two ways to make this project. One version is very simple and easy, perfect for absolute crochet beginners, and the second is for beginner to intermediate crocheters. I like this project because it makes a really unique gift and it's very customizable. This project can be as easy or as complex as you want to make it. And at the end of this video, I'll give you some extra ideas on how to customize this project and really make it your own. Let's dive into version 1. First, we'll talk about some of the materials you'll need. When it comes to yarn, I strongly recommend using a non-stretch durable fiber type. I also strongly recommend that you use a yarn that is weight 4 or lower. If the yarn is too thick, the book may not close properly when you put the sleeve on. I'm using a medium 4 worsted weight cotton yarn, and here are all the details from the label. My book was on the bigger side, so I ended up using about 3 balls of this yarn. For the handle, I'm using a white cotton yarn. I also used about 3 balls of this, but if your book is smaller or bigger or you want your handle to be longer, you may need more or less yarn than me. You'll also need a crochet hook in a size that matches your yarn of choice. You can find this size on your yarn label. A soft measuring tape will be especially helpful because this tutorial uses a lot of measurements since you'll be tailoring this project to fit your specific book, and all the measurements that I use will be listed in the description below in case it's helpful. You'll also need a tapestry needle for weaving in ends, a pair of scissors, something to use as stitch markers. I'm using a pair of bobby pins, and your book of choice. Let's talk about the techniques used in this tutorial. To complete this project, you'll need to know how to create a slip knot, how to chain, how to do a half double crochet stitch, and how to join crochet pieces by sewing them together. If you're not familiar with these techniques, or maybe you need a refresher, I have a playlist linked in the description below for you to use. And throughout this tutorial, if there's ever a technique I mention but don't go into depth on, I'll have a tutorial in the playlist for you to reference. Now it's time to get into the instructions for version 1 of this crochet book purse sleeve. Start by placing a slip knot on your hook. Yarn over and pull through the loop to create your first chain. Continue crocheting until you create a chain that is equal to the length of your book spine. Place your chain along your book to check if it's long enough. I ended up doing about 35 chains, which measured to 10 inches. Once your chain matches the length of your book, add one more chain, which we'll be using as a turning stitch. In the third loop from your hook, we're going to place a half double crochet, so yarn over, insert your hook, yarn over, pull through. You now have 3 loops on your hook. You're going to yarn over and pull through all 3 loops. This is optional, but I recommend placing a stitch marker into your first stitch so that it's easy to keep track of the ends and beginnings of your rows. So continue placing half double crochets into every single stitch until you reach the end of the row. You can also use single crochets for this project if you'd like. Pause the video and continue crocheting until you reach the end of your chain and meet me back for the next step. Now that you've finished your first row, we're going to chain 1 for our turning stitch, flip your work, and add a half double crochet into the very first stitch. So yarn over, insert your hook, yarn over, pull through. You have 3 loops on your hook, yarn over, pull through all 3. Again, optional, but recommended that you place a stitch marker into your first stitch to keep track of your ends. And now we're just going to continue adding half double crochets into every single stitch. Like I said earlier, this first version is very easy. You're just going to continue doing rows and rows and rows of half double crochet until you reach a length that is equal to your book jacket, or if you don't have a book jacket, I'll show you how to find that measurement. If your book comes with a jacket, lie it flat and use your measuring tape to find the length. Mine ended up being about 21 inches. If your book doesn't come with a jacket, maybe it's a paperback, you can just lie your book as flat as possible and measure it from edge to edge. Mine ended up being about 13.5 inches. And then you're going to take another measurement by measuring the front cover. And so mine ended up being about 6 inches. Then you just want to add those two measurements together and add a couple of inches. Keep doing rows and rows of half double crochet until your panel is large enough to fit your book measurement. My panel is 21 inches. This is optional, but I decided to add a border to my panel to give it a cleaner edge. You could also block your panel to straighten it out more. I didn't have time to do it, but it would definitely make your project look neater. I had some yarn left over, so I decided to make a pocket by chaining 17 plus 1 turning chain, and then just doing rows and rows of half double crochet until it measured 4 by 4 inches, and I also added a border. Again, this is totally optional. For the handle, create a chain that measures 1.5 inches. For me, I chained 6. If you want your handle to be more or less wide, you can chain more or less. Add another chain for your turning stitch, and then place a half double crochet into the third chain from your hook. Continue doing rows and rows of half double crochet until you reach a length of 72 inches. If you want your handle to be longer or shorter, you can adjust the length accordingly. Once you reach the length that you want, make sure to leave a long tail because we'll be sewing the two edges together. Lay your panel flat and place your book on it. Pull one edge of the panel until it meets the other evenly. Measure the section between the edge of your book and the end of the panel. Mine was about 3.5 inches. We're going to fold the panel in by that many inches to essentially create a book jacket. Fold your panel in by 3.5 inches or whatever measurement is right for your book. Then add a stitch marker to pin it in place. Repeat this on all sides, and then you're just going to take some yarn and sew each of the 4 edges down to secure it. Also, at this point, you can try it on your book to double check that it fits. Once you finish sewing, you can turn the pockets inside out, which hides the seams and gives it a cleaner look. For the handle, we're going to use the long tail to sew the two ends together, and by doing so, we're essentially creating one big loop. Now that we have all of our pieces prepped, we're ready to put it all together. First, we're going to put the sleeve onto the book. Then you're going to take your handle and fold it together flat so the two sides meet. Place your folded handle on the floor and then center your book on top of it. Bring the other end of the handle to the top so that it wraps around the book, and then adjust it so that they're even. Then lift the top section and move it to the side. Adjust the other section so that they are both along the edges of the book. And as you can see, this is going to create our handle. Next, use your stitch marker to pin it in place, and then repeat the whole process on the other side. Now it's time to sew it together. Start on one edge of the handle. I found that it's easier to angle your needle down so that you're scraping the book and then scooping it through to make sure you're catching both the book sleeve and the handle. Continue sewing all along the edge of the book until you get to the other side. Once you reach the top of the other side, sew across the strip and then down the other edge. Repeat this on the other section. And now you have your very own crochet book purse sleeve to protect and carry your book at the same time. Next, we're going to talk about another way to make this crochet book purse sleeve because who doesn't love options? The second version is slightly more advanced because it uses granny squares. Now, people either love or they hate granny squares. I personally have always been kind of in the middle. I hadn't found a granny square pattern that I really liked until now. This is the OK Flower crochet motif pattern from designer Atty van Norel. If you'd like to use this pattern as well, I'll put a link in the description to their blog where you can find the exact pattern details. For materials, I'm using a weight 1 superfine cotton yarn in pink and cream. Here are all the label details if you are curious. You'll need your granny square pattern of choice. As I mentioned, I'm using the OK Flower pattern by Atty van Norel, which is linked in the description. You'll also need a crochet hook that matches your yarn size, scissors, tapestry needle, your book of choice, and this is optional, but I'm using a knitting mill to create the handle. Now for the instructions. Step 1 is to create enough granny squares to cover your book. You can either lay them out across your book jacket like I am to find out how many you need, or use the method I previously discussed to find the measurement. I ended up needing 12 OK Flower squares to cover the front of my book. Also, I didn't have time, but it would be a great idea to block your granny squares at this point to make your project look extra neat. Then sew all of your granny squares together to create a panel that is big enough to cover the front of your book. As you can see, 12 squares was almost enough to cover the front of my book. There is this slight gap, but no worries because we're adding another section that will act as the inner flap of the book. To add this section, find the corner of your granny square. For the OK Flower pattern that I'm using, this is the chain 1 in between the 2 treble crochets. Insert your hook into the corner. Add a slip knot on your hook and then pull the loop through. Chain 2 and then place a half double crochet into the next stitch, and then continue adding half double crochets in every space until you get to the end of the row. Then continue doing rows and rows of half double crochet until it's long enough to cover the flap of your book jacket. Instead of doing rows of regular crochet, you could continue adding granny squares, however they would just be on the inside of the book, so my added section measured to be about 4 inches in length, but continue crocheting until your panel is enough to fit your book. And the way I checked to make sure it was long enough was I centered my book in the middle of the panel and then folded the panel in to see if it would fit. You can do the same without the book jacket. And then repeat this whole process on the other side. For the handle, I'm using a knitting mill to create a long cord. If you don't know how to use a knitting mill, there's a tutorial in the description you can check out for more info. I continued knitting the cord until it measured to be about 83 inches. Then I fastened off and sewed both ends together. It ended up being a little lumpy, but I'm gonna hide that seam at the bottom of the book. Lay your panel flat, making sure to have the side you want on the outside of your book facing you. This is important because we will be turning the panel inside out after we sew it together, so make sure whatever side you want on the outside is on top right now. Center the spine of your book in the middle of the panel. Fold the panel over and use a stitch marker to pin it in place. Repeat on the other 3 sides and sew the edges together to create the sleeve. Once you've sewn all the edges together, we're then going to turn the little pockets inside out to hide the seams. Now that we have all of our pieces prepped, we're ready to put it all together. Using the same method from version 1, we're going to attach the handle by laying it flat on the floor. I want to hide the handle seam on the bottom of the book, so I adjusted the cord so that the seam was in the middle. Then place your book on top of the handle and fold the other side over the book so the 2 ends meet at the top. Adjust it until the cords are even in length. Move each section to the edge of the book, pin it in place, and then sew it all together. After you're finished attaching the handle, your granny square book purse sleeve is now ready to use. Now that you know the basics of how to make this crochet book purse sleeve, here are some ideas on how to really customize it to make it your own. Instead of using single or half double crochet stitches, you could use the waffle stitch, the alpine stitch, the butterfly stitch, or any of your favorite textured stitches to create a more interesting look. You could add a fun shaped pocket. It could be a heart, a smiley face, a cloud, literally anything you can think of. You can add appliques like flowers or use a grid pattern to create an image on the face of the book sleeve. You can also use different granny squares. I have a playlist on my channel full of fun tutorials that you can use to really customize your book sleeve. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing. I'm also doing a giveaway for one of the book sleeves on my Instagram, so be sure to follow me there for more information. If you use the OK Flower pattern, please credit the original designer, Atty van Norel, per their request. I'll put a sample credit statement in the description below for you to use. See you next time.